Okay, well, we're dealing with chapter 12, so we're getting towards the end of the course, and I'm sure you're very tired at this stage and looking forward to Christmas. So let's just try and focus and try and make this as relevant and as efficient as possible. So one of the important steps is preparing and processing the primary data, and it's a very important step, because it doesn't matter what you've done before in terms of managing your field workers, drafting the questionnaire. If it's not captured properly, then that is going to negate all the good work that you've done before. So it's something that one really needs to consider and make sure that you understand how it works. Okay, just bearing in mind, what you get from the questionnaire is really raw data, and it needs to be processed before being analyzed. So we take the raw data and put it into some sort of electronic format which will allow it to be analyzed, and in so doing generate the information that will allow you to meet the research objectives and solve the original marketing problem. So your first step would be to see if there's any bias or fraud. Just validate the questionnaires. You might see that there have been symbols or the incorrect symbols used, or perhaps somebody has just gone through and perhaps field workers have perhaps just filled it in themselves, probably because they've been paid per questionnaire, or perhaps because they've been paid per questionnaire. So those are the sorts of things that as a researcher you need to make sure that you're on top of, and that there aren't any aspects that might compromise your research. Editing is really checking for mistakes. Perhaps there's some obvious mistakes in the questionnaires, so you need to make sure that those are sorted out. The next step is it's not that difficult, but it's something that you need to make sure that you're on top of. So typically what you do is that you would code each and every answer. Each particular item or answer would have a particular code, and then the potential responses would also be coded. So for example, if you had an item which was stated, I intend to become an entrepreneur, which obviously means that you're trying to measure the intention to become an entrepreneur, you could code that EI1, and typically you'd have a response which would be from strongly disagree to strongly agree, and so strongly disagree would be 1, disagree 2, and sort of neutral would be 3, agree would be 4, and strongly agree would be 5. And that's an important thing to just remind yourselves of. So the 5 would be the most in terms of the strongest response to that particular question. So just to remind you, the particular question would have a code, and all the different responses would also have a code. So how you enter that, typically you'd enter that into an Excel spreadsheet. So each row would be a respondent, and then each column would be a variable. So in respect of the row, you'd have respondent number 1, and then in the column you'd have ER1, indicating that is relates to entrepreneurial intention 1, and then you would record what they had responded. So if it was agree, then you'd fill in a 4, and that, as I said, is done electronically. And then once you've got that into an electronic format, you do some basic data cleaning. Make sure that the number of respondents equals the number of questionnaires, so it's in a sense some sort of audit. All the values are in the expected range, so that you've got no number 10s, for example, and there is a certain amount of consistency in the answers. There will always be missing responses, so it's pointless beating yourself up about that. And there are two basic ways of dealing with it. Okay, the one is case-wise deletion. So if a particular respondent hasn't filled in, let's say, one question, then you delete the respondent from any further analysis. That's what they call case-wise deletion. Pairwise deletion is really where you just delete that particular response from that particular analysis. So you wouldn't include it in the analysis of, for example, entrepreneurial intention. That's the example we've used. But you would use his responses for all the other analyses. And that is pairwise deletion. Okay, then they're just rules of thumb. So often you'd look at it and say, oh, there's something missing. I see all these other responses are perhaps close to 3 or 4, so I'll give it a 3. There are other ways. You could look at the median or the mean as a way of substituting or an incorrect or okay. So the way one actually does it, then it's fairly straightforward. Once, like everything is, once you know how to do it, once you put the data into the Excel spreadsheet, you convert it to an SPSS spreadsheet. In the case of Fort Hare, it's a very simple process, and as I said, like anything, once you've done it once or twice, it's fairly simple. But really it is. So it's not really that complicated at all. So just looking at just a summary of how it goes about incorporating primary data into some sort of usable format. We receive the questionnaires back from the researcher, we validate the questionnaire, we edit them. Sometimes you might need to code open-ended questions. Perhaps you want to convert ratio data into categorical data. You capture it into an electronic format, usually Excel. You convert it into the analysis package, which at Fort Hare is usually SPSS, and then you can also run some sort of analyses within the context of the package. Once again, if people have answered 8, you can check that out when you do some sort of form of descriptive statistics. Alright, that's the end of chapter 12. We're looking forward to chapter 13.